I don't come into any fight with any other mindset than to just kick.
Brock Lesnar has always been brutally honest. No filters, no sugarcoating. And now that raw honesty has him exposing the scary truth about Hulk Hogan. According to Lesnar, the so-called American hero isn't the man fans believed he was, but someone who's been tangled in some of the dirtiest backstage politics in WWE history. And when it comes from a guy like Brock, you know it's serious. Let's break it down, starting with what I'd call the Beast's silent condemnation. Lesnar, the same man who once declared,
Really don't like people? I'm sorry,
would become the unwitting spokesperson for an entire generation of wrestlers who were fed up with Hulk Hogan's stranglehold on professional wrestling. To really understand the weight of what Brock Lesnar represented, you have to look at the landscape he stepped into. Hulk Hogan's WWE career revolutionized wrestling, turning it from regional territories into a global entertainment powerhouse during the 1980s Hulkamania era. With his red and yellow gear, bandana, mustache, and catchphrases like "brother," Hogan became a cultural icon. But that same success fueled resentment among wrestlers, fans, and insiders who saw how Hogan's ego-driven behavior always put personal gain ahead of the industry's long-term health. The contrast between Hogan and Lesnar couldn't have been sharper. Hogan built his empire on charisma and political maneuvering, while Lesnar embodied something entirely different: pure, unfiltered authenticity. Lesnar didn't rely on a manufactured persona crafted to sell merchandise and manipulate crowds. He was a real fighter who conquered every mountain put in front of him. His achievements were staggering: NCAA Division Born Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, the youngest WWE champion in history at the time, and UFC Heavyweight Champion, a trifecta no other wrestler could claim. And unlike Hogan's backstage politicking, these weren't favors from power brokers. They were earned with blood, sweat, and sheer physical dominance. The first public clash of these two wrestling philosophies came in 2002 during a SmackDown match on August 8th. Lesnar dominated Hogan in what was supposed to be a credibility-building warm-up before facing The Rock. But it became more than just a storyline torch passing. It was a symbolic dismantling of everything Hogan represented. Lesnar disrespected Hogan right out of the gate by shoving him across the ring and ripping off his bandana. Despite Hogan's trademark Hulk-up comeback, Lesnar made him pass out in a bear hug for the win, then crushed him with a steel chair, leaving Hogan bloodied as a message to The Rock. This wasn't just scripted wrestling, it was a philosophical statement. A legitimate athlete, proven in the most brutal arenas of real sport, was tearing apart the manufactured mythology of wrestling's biggest star. Fans loved it, noting that Hogan's size made Lesnar look almost normal despite his dominance. But Lesnar's truest feelings about Hogan wouldn't surface until over a decade later, crystallized in a single cutting line. On August 11, 2014, WWE celebrated Hogan's 61st birthday on Monday Night Raw, with legends like Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Scott Hall in attendance. It was designed as a heartwarming nostalgia segment until Lesnar and his advocate Paul Heyman crashed the party to hype Lesnar's SummerSlam match against John Cena. Circling the ring, Lesnar locked eyes with each legend before stopping at Hogan and growling, "Party's over, Grandpa." Heyman piled on with a mocking, "What you gonna do, Hulkster?" Reports later revealed the line was unscripted, thrown in by Lesnar himself, and it infuriated Hogan backstage. TMZ quickly reported the segment as more than just scripted drama, with sources saying Hogan was legitimately furious over the disrespect. John Cena allegedly had to step in, both on camera and backstage, to calm Hogan down before things escalated. But this wasn't just a throwaway insult, it was a symbolic breaking point. Lesnar's "Party's over, Grandpa" cut deeper than a wrestling promo. It represented decades of resentment from wrestlers who had seen Hogan manipulate his way to the top, while more deserving performers were pushed aside. That single unscripted line became a generational declaration. The era of politics over performance was over. To understand why it resonated so strongly, you have to go back to Hogan's controversial legacy. In 1986, before WrestleMania 2, Hogan reportedly tipped off Vince McMahon about Jesse Ventura's attempt to unionize wrestlers for better pay, health benefits, and protections. Hogan's betrayal didn't just kill the movement, it crushed any hope of long-term security for the locker room. By WrestleMania 3, Hogan was raking in more money than the entire roster combined, even more than Andre the Giant, while the rest of the talent struggled without healthcare or retirement plans. Ventura's departure from the WWF after the failed union drive was proof of how deep the wound went. And years later, during McMahon's 1994 steroid trial, the betrayal was confirmed under oath, cementing Hogan's reputation as someone who actively worked against his peers' best interests. For wrestlers who spent their careers with broken bodies and no safety net, Hogan's actions weren't just selfish, they were devastating to their livelihoods. Brock Lesnar's rise stood in stark contrast. He didn't play politics, didn't rely on locker room alliances, and didn't sell empty promises of brotherhood. With Lesnar, what you saw was what you got. Brutal honesty about his motivations, his abilities, and his desire to dominate. That authenticity bled into everything he did. While Hogan built his empire on catchphrases and superhero comebacks, Lesnar's interviews and promos were raw studies in blunt truth.
I'm not a man of many words, all right? That's why I have a guy that does all my talking.
He explained when asked about his psychological approach to opponents that there was nothing complicated about it, no mind games or flashy gimmicks, just stepping into the ring, looking the other man in the eye, and breaking him down until there was nothing left. Because unlike others who relied on theatrics and crowd manipulation, Lesnar's presence and proven dominance were enough to intimidate anyone who stood across from him.
I can't answer that. I'm not out there to feel another man's emotion. I mean, that's ridiculous.
He continued by dismissing the manufactured drama that formed the backbone of sports entertainment. And perhaps the most telling thing was that Lesnar's very presence in the ring stood as a reminder of what true athletic achievement looked like. Even Joe Rogan and Hulk Hogan once discussed Lesnar's insane physical abilities on a podcast, with Rogan pointing out that at 283 pounds, Lesnar ran a 4.7-second 40-yard dash, hit a 35-inch vertical jump, and pumped out 30 reps of 225 pounds on the bench press, numbers that proved he was built different.
I don't understand what that guy did. Like, what that guy did is nothing short of insanity. Like, no one's ever done.
Rogan explained this while talking about Lesnar's transition from professional wrestling to becoming UFC heavyweight champion, pointing out that his freakish strength and athleticism weren't just for show, but the foundation that allowed him to dominate in a real combat sport.
He's a monster, brother.
He's a monster.
He still is.
So he's the biggest genetic freak maybe I've ever seen.
Hogan himself admitted this, and that acknowledgement was particularly significant because it showed a rare moment of honesty about the huge gap between his own carefully manufactured persona and Lesnar's legitimate athletic accomplishments. Hogan had built his career on the illusion of superhuman strength and endurance, but Lesnar actually possessed those superhuman traits, proven time and again in the toughest competitive environments. And that's where the politics of destruction come into play. The deeper you look into the relationship between Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan, the clearer it becomes that their clash wasn't just a simple generational rivalry. It was a battle between two very different philosophies of what professional wrestling should be, and more importantly, what kind of person deserved to be rewarded in its ecosystem. Hogan's approach was defined by ruthless political maneuvering. His creative control clauses and backstage pull led to controversial decisions that almost always protected him while damaging the long-term health of the business. One of the most infamous examples was the finger poke of doom in WCW in 1999, when Hogan and Kevin Nash staged a fake fight that mocked fans and accelerated WCW's decline. Even worse was his constant refusal to lose cleanly to younger stars, most notably in the botched Starrcade 1997 match against Sting, where Hogan manipulated the finish and forced a restart after a supposed fast count, robbing Sting of the moment fans had been waiting years to see. This wasn't just ego. It was a direct attack on wrestling's core storytelling principle, where veterans are supposed to eventually pass the torch. Steve Austin and Mick Foley both spoke out about Hogan, accusing him of burying younger talent, with Austin flat out refusing potential matches because he didn't want to get sabotaged by Hogan's politics. These weren't one-offs, but part of a long pattern that defined Hogan's career. The contrast with Lesnar couldn't be sharper. When he came back to WWE in 2012, he didn't demand creative control or special treatment. Instead, He positioned himself as a true threat within the storylines and let his work in the ring speak for itself. Lesnar believed success should be based on real ability, not backroom deals, and he proved it by being willing to elevate others whether he won or lost. His WrestleMania 30 match against The Undertaker, where he ended the streak, was a move designed for long-term impact rather than short-term ego. Lesnar understood that his role was to raise the entire product, even if it meant taking losses or making opponents look stronger. The political contrast became even clearer when you listened to other wrestlers. The Undertaker himself admitted in a shoot interview that he was uneasy about the NWO's return to WWE, describing it as bringing cancer into the locker room because of egos that were simply too big.
Guys came in with a huge rap on them, you know. I mean, I dealt with them all before in their previous stints here. So, you know, and then I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have my reservations about them coming in.
The Undertaker explained that while he was specifically addressing the NWO, the broader context of his comments reflected a widespread concern about wrestlers who cared more about personal advancement than the collective success of the business. And this point hits especially hard when looking at Hogan's influence across his different runs in multiple promotions, because his legacy was often tied to backstage politics and self-preservation, whereas Lesnar's approach to the business was the exact opposite, rooted not in manufactured leverage, but in proven ability and the credibility that came from his unmatched athletic dominance.
Prize fighter, all right? I come to Monday Night Raw to promote.
He explained that he saw wrestling as legitimate competition rather than just predetermined entertainment, and this perspective allowed him to work within the system while still protecting his authenticity and credibility. The wrestling community's reaction to these two different approaches said a lot. While Hogan was constantly caught in controversies and backstage drama, Lesnar's reputation stayed largely intact, even among those who might have resented his success. A big reason for this was Lesnar's willingness to be honest about wrestling's predetermined nature while backing it up with real competitive credentials that nobody could deny. Hogan, on the other hand, hurt his own legacy with years of fabrications and lies that destroyed trust in him. He claimed to wrestle 400 days a year because of time zones, said he was scouted by Major League Baseball, insisted he turned down the George Foreman grill, and even told stories about partying with John Belushi after WrestleMania 2, even though Belushi had died in 1982. The most ridiculous lie came when Hogan repeatedly claimed he was Lesnar's first opponent after Lesnar's 2012 WWE return, when in reality Lesnar's first match back was against John Cena at Extreme Rules. Hogan wasn't even with WWE at the time, yet he repeated the lie on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2023 and in a 2025 TMZ interview, which sparked endless mockery online. What made these lies so damaging was how they showed Hogan's constant need to insert himself into the achievements of others, even long after his career was over. Lesnar's response to all of this was simple and direct. He didn't waste time arguing or correcting Hogan in interviews, he just let his actions speak for themselves. The difference between their approaches showed in business as well. Hogan was infamous for using his power to manipulate bookings and protect his spot at the expense of others, while Lesnar treated his career with professional pragmatism. He knew his worth, negotiated hard, but never tore the system apart to get his way. The most revealing part of Lesnar's philosophy was his willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about wrestling. In interviews, he openly admitted the balance between real athletic ability, scripted outcomes, and entertainment, a level of honesty that clashed completely with Hogan's myth-making. While Hogan built his brand on the illusion that his success came from training, prayers, and vitamins, Lesnar admitted what wrestling really was, and that honesty carried political weight. By refusing to keep the old myths alive, Lesnar was pushing for a new model of wrestling based on athletic achievement and straightforward business, not lies and manipulation. The difference became even clearer when looking at their career transitions. Hogan often left promotions in chaos, surrounded by lawsuits and broken relationships, with WCW collapsing partly because of the political mess he helped create, and his TNA run remembered mostly for controversy. Lesnar, by contrast, left WWE in 2004 for UFC in a clean and professional way, writing in his autobiography Death Clutch that his issues were with the system, not with individuals. Because of that, when he returned in 2012, both WWE and the fans welcomed him back with open arms. and that's the final verdict. Lesnar didn't need to bury Hogan in interviews or write exposés to reveal the truth. His entire career was proof that he was everything Hogan pretended to be, but without the character flaws that destroyed Hogan's reputation. The most damaging blow to Hogan's legacy wasn't even from Lesnar, but from himself. In 2015, leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape revealed Hogan using racial slurs and expressing disgust at his daughter dating a black man, even saying, "I am a racist," to a point. The fallout was immediate. WWE cut ties, erased him from the Hall of Fame, and pulled his merchandise. The contrast between Hogan's all-American hero image and his private racism couldn't have been more devastating. And through it all, Lesnar's response was the same as always. He stayed out of scandals because he didn't create them.
This is who I am.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean you don't like?
Lesnar explained this in a way that showed he fully understood himself and lived according to his own nature, rather than trying to be what others expected or wanted, and that authenticity carried into every part of his professional life. When asked why he returned to WWE, he was brutally honest, making no effort to soften his answer or make it more family-friendly. And the impact of that honesty becomes even clearer when compared to Hogan's approach to public relations. Hogan spent his career cultivating the image of a role model for kids, pushing slogans about training, prayers, and vitamins, while privately engaging in behavior that contradicted those values, with his steroid admission during Vince McMahon's 1994 trial standing as just one example of the gap between his public persona and private reality. The clearest difference between the two men showed in how they handled failure. When Lesnar was forced to step away from UFC because of diverticulitis, he spoke openly about his health issues and how they affected his career, never downplaying or inventing excuses to protect his image. Hogan, by contrast, followed the same pattern he always had, minimizing, deflecting, and spinning whenever he faced setbacks, as seen during the racism scandal when he tried to blame his comments on his upbringing and plead for forgiveness, while still clinging to his place in the industry. The reactions to these approaches told the story. Many black wrestlers like Mark Henry, Booker T, and JTG said they were hurt and skeptical about Hogan's sincerity, while Lesnar maintained respect across racial and generational lines, not because he was diplomatic or politically correct, but because people preferred blunt honesty to polished hypocrisy. When Hogan died at 71 in July 2025 from cardiac arrest, the media coverage of his legacy balanced his massive contributions to wrestling with the scandals that had tarnished his name. And the fact that his obituaries focused just as much on his controversies as his accomplishments showed how far his reputation had fallen. The bigger picture in Lesnar's quiet critique of Hogan is that he represented a challenge to the entire system that allowed someone like Hogan to thrive for so long. Because by proving that true athletic ability and authentic personality could succeed commercially, Lesnar showed that politics and manufactured drama weren't necessary. This was echoed by legends like The Undertaker, whose warnings about cancer in the locker room reflected an industry-wide frustration with wrestlers who only cared about themselves. And while he didn't name Hogan directly, his comments perfectly described the kind of mentality Lesnar rejected and the authenticity he stood for.
Don't like being around a bunch of people, and it's kind of ironic because I can go out in an arena full of 20,000 people and be all right with it, only because I feel like I'm in this dome, and
He explained with characteristic simplicity, summing up his philosophy in just a few straightforward sentences, and that approach helped Lesnar handle controversies and challenges that might have destroyed careers built on weaker foundations.